Armenian genocide, that's a big issue right there, right? And I want to be sort of brief about this issue and just get straight to the point because, well, first of all, I have to say that this issue, it has only been discussed, in my opinion, and has been pushed forward as a tool against Turkiye mostly, which is the reason why what I'm going to be discussing further has never been discussed yet. At least I haven't seen anything like that. And in my opinion, Armenian genocide, because it's been like so pushed forward, there is an element, at least like an element of Turkophobia, if you can say so. And if you look at which countries, like for example, France is specifically trying really hard to push it forward, And we know there's some anti-Turkish sentiments in France specifically. So, yeah, because as far as I know, France is like one of the European states that is like extremely against Turkey entering the EU, basically. So that sort of explains it, And then there's, of course, like historical rivalry, sort of, I would say even hostility, I would say even, And that, in my opinion, that is the fundamental sort of explanation of why France is so supportive of the narrative of the Armenian genocide. And the United States, right now, it seems like it's also like very sort of pushy about the issue. But if you actually think about the real motive here, it's really Turkophobia. I mean, because I can hardly imagine I can hardly imagine the West being like really loving of the Armenian nation. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, the Western nations, they could have given way more help to the Ukraine, okay, to the people that are much wider than Armenians. Let's be honest. I mean, the question if Armenians are even white is still on the table, basically, at this point, despite the fact of them being sort of in the European, they're not like really on the really wide spectrum of in the Europeanness, if you can put it that way, So, yeah, well, they are Christians, but they are also Orthodox, and I can hardly imagine that Armenians are being like really loved, and France is really like trying to help Armenia, and that's why they're pushing the narrative. It really doesn't sit right with me. It's just, and specifically, why is because the Armenian genocide, the issue itself, is not being discussed honestly. There is not enough honesty, or maybe even no honesty at all. And I can tell you why. It's because the whole genocide, whether it happened or not, I'm neutral to this issue, specifically whether it happened or not. But I think that if Armenian genocide is discussed, I think it can only be discussed as a complex matter together with the other genocides of the neighboring nations, specifically, the nations aboriginal to the Caucasus, and specifically it's the Circassians and the Nogai people. Okay, we cannot be discussing the Armenian genocide without the genocide of the Circassians and the Nogais. Okay, and they are not being discussed specifically because if we start discussing them together in a complex sort of way, then it turns out that Turkey cannot be really responsible for if we hypothesize that Armenian genocide happened, because this issue in and of itself is it's not that straightforward. Okay, but if we accept that Armenian genocide did take place, and then we also go further and discuss the genocide of Circassians and the Nogais people, which happened at about roughly at about the same time. The difference is it's probably like 50, 60 years apart, okay? But they live in the same region. They're really neighboring peoples, okay? So we have to be discussing them if we're truly honest. If we're racist towards Muslim people, Circassians and Nogai people, they both Muslim nations, okay? And they were genocided by the Russian Empire. And then they found, the ones that survived, they found their refuge in the Ottoman Empire, basically in Turkiye, okay? And that happened in the second half of the 19th century. As I said, 50, 60 years before the Armenian genocide, okay? So if we discuss that genocide, Circassian and Nogais, it turns out that the Turkey cannot really be responsible for the so-called Armenian genocide because the two genocides, they net each other out, you know. Circassian and Nogai genocide on one side, and then the Armenian genocide on the other side, they net each other out because the Russian Empire was genociding, trying to get rid of the Circassians, of its Muslim populations in the Caucasus, the Nogais and the Circassians. And where did they go? They went to Ottoman Empire. Even today, most Circassians, they live outside the historical territory, which is South Russia, Krasnodar, Stavropol, you know, those territories. And you can barely find any Circassian today there. Almost all of them, they live in Turkiye today. Well, in Turkiye, then like in Jordan, some other Middle Eastern countries, but the majority, they live in Turkiye. It's like 105, it's like 1.5 or to 2 million people. So the Russians drove them away, basically, and they genocided. The rough numbers, the rough estimate is up to like 625,000 Circassians were literally genocided by Russia. Okay, so now if we and then there's also Nogai people, right? It's the rough estimates. They don't even have like the rough estimates, but it could be up to like 150,000. So if you add them up, the number gets close to 1 million, basically, right? And then you have Turkiye, the Ottoman Empire, which was allegedly genociding Armenians who were Christian. And then where did these Armenians flee? Mostly, they fled to, or were deported, or were driven out to Russia, basically. So if you actually look at the numbers, there's about 2 million Armenians living in Russia, then there's about like 2.5 million living in modern day Armenia. Well, so basically they have their own state today, although it's not like as huge. And Armenians, of course, they want like a bigger territory, but the netting out, basically an effective exchange of populations did take place. And you can actually look at it as an exchange of populations between the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire. Okay, so the Armenian genocide was literally, it was just like the end of that exchange, sort of the ending phase, you know. So, and if we look at the issue today, if we look at the situation today, even, right, you will see that those historical territories which belong to the Nogai people and the Circassians, who do not, practically they do not live in Russia anymore. The number is probably like 300,000, but as I've already said, the absolute majority of them, they were deported away from Russia, and mostly to the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so those territories that were populated in the 19th century, populated by the Circassians and the Nogais, today they are mostly populated by, guess who? Well, the Russians, yes, and the Armenians as well. The estimates are roughly there's hundreds of thousands of Armenians now basically living on historical Circassian and Nogai lands. What are you going to tell me about that then? Why is no one discussing this shit? you know. And then you have like Armenians, they like claiming that, oh, Turkey needs to give us back our historical territories. Basically, that like 1/4 or 1/3 of modern day Turkiye, especially its eastern parts, are actually historical Armenia. That's what they claim, so, right? They are angry that those territories, they were historical Armenian territories, but now they belong to Turkiye, and it's mostly like Turkish people who live there today. So it's unfair, yeah, but it might be unfair on one if you just look at it only from your angle, right? But if you incorporate into the whole sort of scheme the fact that you are Armenian people, a lot of them, like by the hundreds of thousands, they live on the territory of the Muslim populations that were expelled and now are living in Turkiye, the Circassians. The rough estimates are about 2 million Circassians, up to 1 million maybe Nogai people, they live in Turkiye. So again, historical Armenian lands, yeah, but Armenians are living on the territory of Russia on historical Circassian and Nogai lands. Okay, so this is literally an exchange of people. So what are you whining about? And at the time of this exchange, people died. Both Armenians died, and the Circassians and Nogai people died. Yeah, but no one's talking about the Circassian and Nogai genocide as much as the Armenian genocides. So Armenians, they want to resolve this issue and get reparations and some territories from Turkiye. They want it to be like a one-sided sort of resolution. They don't give a shit about the Circassians, the Nogais. No, they are happy excluding them. They just want their own issue to be resolved, their own genocide. They want to get the status, right? But we have to look at the issue in complex sort of style, right? So there's just no other way. We have to incorporate the Circassians and the Nogais, and then it turns out the issue is resolved by netting out, because you can't give Turkish territory, modern day Turkish territory, to Armenians, to that small sort of state of Armenia. You can't do that unless you give territories, the historical territories of Circassians and the Nogai people in Russia today, back to Circassians and the Nogais. So that basically means Armenians, when they say that, they basically asking for an exchange of territories nowadays. But I mean, is it even feasible? Just that it doesn't seem like it, because then Turkey will basically cut some of its like eastern piece and get some territories on the modern day Krasnodar and Stavropol, basically southwestern Russia. I don't know if that is feasible. I don't even know. It's that would look weird, but that's the only way to resolve this issue. Really, you can't just demand Turkey give its territory and pay reparations to Armenians. If that's what you want, if that's what you will be trying to do, that will literally mean that you are just Turcophobes and you are racist, because you don't give a shit. You put Armenian life on a much higher sort of level. You give it way more value than the life of modern day Circassians and Nogai people. Although most Nogai people who live in Turkey today, I think they have already assimilated, because they are Turkey peoples. So since the 19th century, as far as I know, most of them have already assimilated and just became Turkish. But it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they haven't really kept up the diaspora, like they haven't maintained their own sort of dialect, like their language from back then. It doesn't even matter. What matters is that these people who came from them, today they call themselves Turkish. They are just like a regular Turkish person, basically, living in Turkey. But it really doesn't matter, because the progeny is still there, okay, of those people who were genocided and deported. So yeah, I mean, this issue cannot be resolved just in an isolated way, just by resolving the Armenian genocide. Okay? And that's why, in my opinion, Turkey needs to really push forward the issue of the Circassian genocide and the Nogai genocide.